If I see people disappearing during my talk, I will understand that your stomachs are ruling. My name is Inge Birnie. I'm at Strathclyde. I work in the School of Education, but I'm secretly a social linguist, but I don't tell my boss that. Hope she's not listening. Today, basically my talk, in case you're very hungry, can be summarized, I agree with Daniel. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about two projects myself and Maggie Glass have been involved in. And it's about Gaelic language use and identity in the digital era. So I don't know a lot about computational linguistics, but what I am very interested in is people using minority language. So my PhD was focused on what language do people use in physical spaces and what makes them use Gaelic. And of course then we have already had the C word earlier, COVID. So what we kind of then said, oh well, people now moving to online spaces. Now, this is why, technological failure.
Arrow keys, maybe?
Arrow keys. Arrow keys, yes, see. Okay, we've already seen, we have more than one picture about Scottish Gaelic, by the way, but we just kind of obviously, have this, but it's definitely endangered. One of the issues we face is our Gaelic speakers are also proficient in English, and that's a problem, and acquisition is almost exclusively through the educational system. So, it is marginalized in physical communities, even in those communities in the Western Isles. I sat in pubs, I sat in cafes for hours on end, trying to listen to the languages people speak, and it was predominantly English, even in places where the majority of people can speak Gaelic. So if it's marginalized in physical communities, what happens online in social media? And there's limited social networks. Gaelic speakers look like normal human beings. It's something we forget. You don't know who else is a Gaelic speaker, so you have to assume that they're English speakers. And that's what people assume. We don't have tags on our forehead going, Gaelic speaker, speak to me. One of my students actually said to me, I've never met a real life Gaelic speaker. I said, you possibly have. There is kind of the support for technology to foster and encourage communities of practice, which are not bounded by traditional geographical boundaries and speech communities. As we heard earlier, there's a lot of Gaelic speakers, not just in the Western Isles, in the Central Belt, diaspora, Germany has a massive Gaelic speaking community, older age there, very, and it's kind of, one of the things about social media, it can be anonymous and user driven. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. We saw earlier, sort of user with a number. But you can be anyone you want to be almost online, and you don't have to be your real self. And sometimes this can help in a minority language context where there's still, issues around, do I want to be associated with this language or not? And that sort of sense of identity. So I've kind of based this talk on two bits of work. One bit of work I was more heavily involved in than another bit. The first one is a Gaelic language use online survey with young people, that is people sort of up to the age of 25, and that it doesn't sound like a lot of response, and obviously like the response rate is fairly decent because people are only really going to respond if they have particular strong feelings about Gaelic, because it's like an optional thing. So a third had some basic competences in Gaelic, and around a third of those without Gaelic were interested in learning the language. And I've picked 2022 because I've got Twitter data from 2022 before it all went exy and funny and we can't do things with it anymore. And I kind of feel like we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants. So Daniel's now doing TikTok, Daniel was doing Twitter. So I feel we're moving towards Twitter next. We'll be seeing where Daniel goes next. Okay, I've got this. They use Gaelic they see Gaelic online, but especially in social media posts, videos and TV programs. Apparently no one watches TV on a TV screen anymore. We don't do that anymore. Language learning resources, I'll let you guess. It's the green owl for Gaelic. That's where they use Gaelic in online. They see that as an online space. I would have thought it's an application, but hey, I'm obviously not young and with it anymore. So this is where they see Gaelic. And then we kind of said, so users see Gaelic in the following online space. Now there's multiple choice. Now you see Duolingo Instagram, which again, it's kind of interesting because it follows on again what Daniel said, so that I can summarize whatever Daniel said earlier. Because you would think of Instagram as very much a photo-based application. So I think there's very much also the comments and maybe the text underneath it. So it's something I maybe should look at. TikTok, dedicated Gaelic websites, YouTube, Facebook, school resources. Now Twitter comes in there. Snapchat, still a thing apparently amongst young people. Who would have thought it? Reddit and Discourse. Now other write-in was not, it's not a language learning app in case you wonder, it's just other write-in, anything of your choice there. So you can see Gaelic is actually, well, they see it and use it. But Duolingo, if we leave that one out, to be honest, because that's a language learning app, it's fairly limited. But then when we ask, so where would you like to see more Gaelic content? And I think this is kind of very interesting, as again, you can see where young people have their social media use. What would they interact with? And what I found interesting, it's not the written text social media application. So it's Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube are very much popular. And then you have Twitter, which I think we can argue has a bit of both, but it is quite heavily text-based. Facebook, and then Snapchat. So where would you like to see this Gaelic content? And I kind of have to say, we don't seem to have a lot of Gaelic influencers. We have two. One is a TV presenter, and well, both of them are TV presenters. Both of them front up the Learn Gaelic website. One is into wild swimming and running and all sorts of things, and the other one is a Gaelic singer. She also presents the weather on the BBC, the Gaelic BBC channel. We have more than one person, but those seem to be the two influencers that we have. And then we asked, what sort of content do you want to see? And I think this is from a young person perspective very interesting. So they look very much at TikTok and Reels, and there's some story content, which I was kind of surprised at. And I think I can relate to this because young people kind of use this multimedia voice. It is kind of understanding spoken Gaelic. It's often easier than written Gaelic. And obviously when you have to produce content yourself, if in speech it's quite normal to make mistakes, whereas if you write it down, and we've all seen this on social media posts, you make a mistake and then a person kind of comments, or it's the wrong word, it's the wrong version, it's the wrong dialect, you haven't lenited, you haven't used a grammatical construction. You know, you put yourself at risk of being critiqued. And if it's spoken text, it's, I think, more acceptable. You can speak really quickly, which is what I do when I get interviews on the BBC. You speak really quickly in hopes that no one spots the mistakes. And I think that's kind of where this comes from, and also sort of listening rather than reading. I think maybe, this multimedia content is very interesting. So why did I pick this data set? Maggie Glass did some work in Ireland on digital breathing spaces, so communities that bring people together. And I have to be careful what I say so I don't go off-piste and say something very controversial. But we have the Gaelic Development Board, Board na Gaelic, and they're very much into promoting Gaelic language use in all possible domains. And they obviously thought, let's have a dedicated Gaelic week. And now it's actually quite interesting. So it's actually World Gaelic Week, but in Gaelic it's Seach na Gaelic, Gaelic Week. But so the hashtag, there was two hashtags here, World Gaelic Week and Seach na Gaelic. And I know you can't read it, but it's an opportunity for Gaelic speakers and without the languages take part in a way that suits them in Scotland, further afield. And essentially it was inspired by other language campaigns. Now we've had this running every few years, but obviously, it's become more complicated because Twitter issues. But it basically aims to raise the profile of Gaelic through community initiatives, projects and events as a status planning initiative. It's meant to be inclusive to Gaelic and non-Gaelic speakers, and it is really implicitly aimed at community forming. So getting Gaelic speakers together. As I said, because we look vaguely normal, and even on social media, we behave fairly normally. So, you know, we may or may not post in Gaelic. So this was an initiative to really promote this. And it followed on from previous events, which had been very successful. World Gaelic Day, where Gaelic Twitter Day, and that ran for years. So that was kind of the initiative. So aimed to celebrate Gaelic, and this is the CEO of Birnie Gaelic, unnamed, she's since moved on. Will increase connections through the Gaelic community, raising the language's profile, contributing to the National Gaelic Language Plan, that more people use Gaelic more often and in more situations, providing a platform for Gaelic speakers. So this was sort of the aims of bringing people together through digital means. We did this now, again, I'm using corpus, not in the same sense as other people. Basically, all the tweets that I gathered, that I scraped, I could still use a scraping tool and these still worked. Oh, happy days. And we scraped for hashtag World Gaelic Week and hashtag Seachtain na Gaelic. Often they kind of came together. People did all the hashtags. Also hashtag Gaelic, hashtag Gaelic. We got 728 unique tweets. We looked at the profile, retweets, quotes, and likes for each post. It was actually quite a big data set, surprisingly. And we analyzed them according to the language used, you know, Gaelic, English, Gaelic and English together, other languages, or no textual context whatsoever, just a picture. And this is where it started to become complex, because we also looked at who tweeted these tweets. And we had business accounts, so we had things like the Gaelic BBC tweeted. We had private organizations, and then we had this, what I call private business accounts, like school teachers, tweeting about something that happened in their school. So it wasn't a private account, it wasn't a business account, it was this weird thing. Some of them were unknown, because by the time we came to analyze it, Elon Musk had taken over Twitter and some people had deleted their accounts. We had the purpose of the tweet, business and private, which fits in with my previous studies about who uses Gaelic and where. And this is what we found. We found most of the tweets were actually in English. So it was kind of this sort of almost this virtual signaling. There were 146 bilingual tweets, and then I said 222 tweets that were predominantly in Gaelic, but often with English words. But then that is, as we heard earlier, like for Welsh, I think I would mark a true Gaelic speaker as someone who inserts English words in their Gaelic sentences, because that marks out a proficient Gaelic speaker to me, which is a bit of a controversial statement. But this is like an example of one of them. A bit of English insert, so it's a bit of English and then a very simple statement in Gaelic. I'm eating pizza with black pudding. You know, so it's kind of interesting how the hashtags were used, and it became more bizarre as we went through the tweets. So just, you know, I know we're just before lunch. What we found actually, to look at this, organizations and business use the hashtags to advertise and promote their goods and services or signal their support. So it's very much like, look at us, we sell bakery items, and look, we support Gaelic. So it's kind of a bit random. There were a lot of English tweets by individuals, just as we saw for the TikTok videos, in support of the language. I'm learning Gaelic. I've learned a few words with Duolingo. Kimra how are you? This is the extent of my Gaelic, learning Gaelic. So there was very much that sort of support for the language signaled. And one of the things that was really interesting, because the hashtags we used, I think, attracted mostly positive responses to Gaelic, whereas if you normally have something in Gaelic, it would often get a very negative response. So just as a little aside, the First Minister for Scotland visited the Western Isles, and the Scottish government put out a Gaelic tweet saying, you know, visited the Western Isles, support for rural communities. That went out in Gaelic, and immediately underneath it was, you know, what is this gibberish? Who speaks the language anyway? Gaelic is a dead language. Why was, you know, you could just play the whole bingo set was represented there. We didn't find that in this, but I think it's because we looked at the hashtags, and I think people are not going to interact with this particular hashtag unless they feel particularly strongly, but we didn't find this. So it's maybe a very unusual Twitter data set in that regard. Here's a couple of examples. It's been fun learning this language so far, smiley face. It's been tough at times, but the rewards pay off. It's hashtag World Gaelic Week. I know a little Gaelic. I'm learning Gaelic on Duolingo and at Speak Gaelic. So it was this very much this signaling, almost support, learning the language, you know, positive, you know. But notice that these were all in English, interestingly. Now, these are things that maybe people could actually say in Gaelic, but they chose not to, maybe because of their learner status, you know, and so there's some typos in there, but people were very good and didn't correct the typos on here. I think this is where it started to become really interesting, and I don't know if you can read it at the back, but there was this really strange thing about promoting Gaelic, using Gaelic to promote goods and services that had really nothing to do with Gaelic. So here's Ardgar Ales. It's Gaelic Week, and every day our brewer will showcase one of our lovely ales. Nice. Now she's actually, I know she's a Gaelic speaker. She speaks a lot on radio, you know, on the radio, on the television. She presents programs, but it's, you know, it was very much just using, almost like jumping on a bandwagon of Gaelic, this positivity towards identity. Thank you. And then it's also like celebrate World Gaelic by supporting our Fab course and buying a ticket, looking at her Facebook resources. So these were all strange. Now this was maybe my favorite of all. Tokenistic use of Gaelic. What could be better for World Gaelic Week than helping everyone to know your menopause, free from positivity? Because, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was as puzzled as you are. But the poster is in Gaelic, so that's good. And then, this one is also one of my favorites. And I'll tell you why, because there's a bit of irony here. Matam Vaha, Shachkin Gaelic a Torshig, Jimmy in Briskitchen Imprach, Empire Biscuits. Just the thing to talk about when you're speaking about a Celtic language that has suffered from, never mind, so yeah. The irony. But this is another sort of influencer who relies on his association with the Hebridean Islands. He never uses Gaelic, except for this one post. But yeah, I thought the Empire Biscuit of all the things to bake that day. Maybe not. Okay, so yeah, the irony did not come through. So, thanks to Gareth, we spoke about friction points. What makes Gaelic difficult to use? So, come back. Even on something like World Gaelic Week, a lot of the resources that you see, the online content is in English or very tokenistic, not aimed at fostering communities. What I call the virtual linguistic landscape and soundscape of online media is English. And social networks that use the language, that use language with shared common interests kind of work, but Shachkin Gaelic was too broad. The only common interest that people had was Gaelic, and that is too broad an interest for people to want to make connections. So people didn't say, oh, you're learning Gaelic, I'm also learning Gaelic. There wasn't that. It was just thumbs up or likes, rather than I'm also learning Gaelic, do you want to meet up? This is what young people say from back to the survey. It's easier because more people use English. English is more commonly used, and a lot of search engines don't understand what you're trying to say. I love that I'm able to speak Gaelic, and if I had more Gaelic resources, I would prefer to use them. I want a Gaelic YouTube channel aimed at teenagers, cover many topics, current events, lifestyle, video games to school subjects, but then anything you make for a teenager is by default not cool. Just to have. So what do we want? Kind of a recognition of Gaelic in and across our social media. What you spoke about the simultaneous plurilingual interactions. Voice to text and text to voice would be lovely. It would be very nice if I typed pog, which is kiss, to my husband, and it didn't turn it into pig, which is not what I want to tell my husband at night. It still happens, so there's this extra barrier, to using Gaelic online. There's this autocorrect that turns it back into English. So even if you're typing something on Twitter, you have to really make a big effort. And we all know, of course this doesn't count for us because we're all but humans are lazy beings. If you have to make that extra effort to make it work, you'll just do it in English. If I have to write a Gaelic text and it takes me 3 times as long, I go, oh, forget it, I'll just do it in English. And teenagers are worse. I have one, so I know about how this works. And we really want to see increased visibility for technology in 4 languages. So I'm watching Mo because he's going to move me off the stage soon. I'm almost at the last slides. So what we want is, as I said, going back to people are kind of do what comes easy to them. So what I really want to see is Gaelic languages will be facilitated by the perceived ease of use and the overt inclusion of Gaelic in digital spaces. And it's the same as what happens in real life, because real life, online mirrors real life. So if you don't see Gaelic or Welsh or Cornish or Breton and you're not sure if it is allowed to use, if there's permission to use it, you need to see other people use it and hear it. That doesn't mean that you will also use it, but it gives you that psychological nudge that you might be able to should you want to. But if it's just English, you go, do I want to be the first one to do this? Maybe not. So the overt inclusion of Gaelic and the perceived ease of use. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I enjoyed that a lot, as you might well imagine. My question is, given everything that you've said, do you think if hashtag World Gaelic Week was done now on TikTok, it would be different, or do you think you'd see much of the same?
In terms of, I don't know. I would really like to work. I might have to go back because we had a World Gaelic Week not so long ago, and I would really like to see what we get, because I know that there are some Gaelic accounts on TikTok now and that it's becoming much more of a thing for young people. Because maybe what I looked at was obviously Twitter, and obviously Twitter is not the place for young people to be anymore. Although we're here, most of us are on Twitter, so I don't want to say it's not for young people anymore. But I would like to see, I'd be very interested, so that maybe should be my next project. So I think you've just nudged me towards a future study there, Daniel. Yeah, thank you.
I think it would be interesting, A, because it's the young people, and B, because speech rather than text, I think, I think part of the problem is like the text thing is a barrier for young people. Speech is much easier, a video is easier to access, it doesn't involve reading and writing and all those sort of complex. That's kind of, I think, part of it. It's much easier to do a spoken piece than a written piece. I've got a comment here. Okay, so has done a great job in engaging young Irish speakers. So Gaelic Week was very well taken up on TikTok by content creators. Thank you, Amy, for that. I'm going to, something I need to look at I think, after this presentation for future study.
You have a question?
Yeah.
Just a quick thing. The results of a survey of 1,000 Irish people was released across media there recently, and it was basically that using Irish was good for business was the result of the survey, and it speaks to the same sort of virtue signalling in a way that you're talking about, but the way it's being interpreted through this survey is that it makes people believe that the company is Irish, and I think a third were happy to pay more, a little bit more if the company was Irish, and a few things like this. And it'd be worth, I can send it on to you. That'd
be great. I know like Gaelic in Scotland is a very complicated beast because it's not necessarily associated with national identity. So I know there will be some companies that will be happy to, so this Western Isles baker is very much in the Western Isles where Gaelic is spoken, so it's very much like an identity thing for him. I would imagine that he's done this. there were also some other companies, the brewer, this one is also in a Gaelic speaking area. Gaelic is such a complicated beast, but I would imagine that the companies that supported Gaelic were either, public services, so have a Gaelic plan, or were kind of, quite happy, normally Western Isles mostly based, or Highlands and Island based. So that's kind of another bit to look into who supported Gaelic. What did they put out? Do they normally put out Gaelic tweets, or was it like a one-off for the occasion, a special occasion? But it was very much like, I felt jumping on the bandwagon, promoting this, to be part of this Gaelic thing.
The one other quick thing I wanted to say was we obviously have Strathclyde as well, which, funny enough, doesn't last for a week. It lasts for up to a month. But it speaks to how long I was talking earlier on. But one of the questions that I see arising around these types of things is it might help learners come together, but does it help the learners connect with the community of speakers? And I really don't think it does, and it's something that's missing and needs to be worked on a little bit better. For those kind of, what would you call them, like awareness weeks and that type of thing. Does it truly connect you? Or, it doesn't change.
I think we hoped it would connect people. I'll be quick because I think Mo is kind of moving towards the deadline. I'll fill the space. Don't worry, Mo, till you come back. It is very much, I think that's what it hoped to do, but it didn't because it was too broad. And if you've only got the language to connect you, that's not enough. So I referenced Maggie Glass's work. She looked at Irish fandom at a couple of TV programs, and that brought people together because they had and Irish and a particular television program that they want to talk about. Whereas learning Gaelic is a kind of an interest, but it wasn't enough to bring people together. So as I said, you would get one person, I'm learning Gaelic, and you would get lots of thumbs up, but then you would not get anyone else saying, oh, do you want to meet up? Do you want to chat in Gaelic on whatever? And I think that is where I don't want to say it went wrong, but where it kind of missed maybe its intended aim.
Thank you very much.
Okay.